What's good, y'all? You're listening to the Liberty Cast, and I'm your host, Big E. On this week's episode, we talk about how much the left hates President Trump more than they love America, and I actually question whether they love America at all. The Founding Fathers would not be surprised at anything that is happening in American politics right now. Robert Francis drops out of the disarmament primary, and we will break down what that means for the rest of the field and the country as a whole. Constitutional carry goes into effect in another state while others try to circumvent the Constitution. And a prominent leftist pundit tries to libsplain another ridiculous comment from AOC. We'll get into all that and more on this week's episode of the Liberty Cast. So in proof that the left hates Trump more than they love this country news, we heard last weekend after we recorded this podcast that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. And Trump's announcement was epic.
Last night was a great night for the United States and for the world. A brutal killer, one who has caused so much hardship and death, has violently been eliminated. He will never again harm another innocent man, woman, or child. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place. He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's gone. Baghdadi was vicious and violent, and he died in a vicious and violent way as a coward, running and crying.
This guy was an animal. He was a brutal rapist, tortured people. He was an Islamic extremist. We all know this, and any rational American is glad he's dead. But the left, in many instances, is far from rational. They actually had a problem with Trump's announcement, and we'll get to that in a second, but the Washington Compost actually ran the headline, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State, dies at 48. What? And the article accompanying it was even worse. Quote, when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi took the reins of the Islamic State of Iraq in 2010, few had heard of the organization or its new leader, then an austere religious scholar with wire-framed glasses and no known aptitude for fighting and killing. Wow. They hate President Trump so much that they're willing to praise a terrorist leader who's known for torturing and killing and raping people. I mean, what is wrong with these people? But then we have Max Boot, and I haven't talked much about Max Boot because he's an idiot. But this one I just couldn't let go because he actually tweeted, Trump could not have heard whimpering and crying because there was no audio, and Esper and Milley refused to confirm those details. The assertion that Baghdadi died as a coward was contradicted by the fact that rather than be captured, he blew himself up. Wow. I mean, just so much wrong with that. I mean, suicide rather than be captured is actually called the coward's way out. I mean, they just can't. It's physically impossible for them to give President Trump a win. This is something that should have been celebrated universally. But rather than do that, they downplay the vicious nature of this animal and criticize President Trump's characterization of the man and the way he died in his announcement. I have no problem with it. I actually enjoyed the fact that he called him a coward and said that he died like a dog. Because in Islamic culture, dogs are considered filthy and dirty. And so, yes, by all means, call him a dog. even though the dog that actually helped kill him is braver than any Islamic terrorist could ever hope to be. I mean, the Washington Compost, Max Boot, all the rest of them need to just go away. They serve no purpose. They're just taking up space. They're oxygen thieves. And Bezos needs to just fold up shop on the Washington Compost because it's nothing more than a rag at this point. The National Enquirer has more credibility. I know that happened early last week, but I just wanted to get that out there and get you my take on the situation. But we're going to switch gears here for a second. If you have given up your militia and Congress shall refuse to arm them, you have lost everything. Your existence will be precarious because you depend on others whose interests are not affected by your infelicity. That was a quote by one of my favorite founding fathers, Patrick Henry. He said that in the debates at the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788, I believe. So many of the writings and quotes from the founders have an uncanny prescience. One of the main reasons I started this podcast is to spread the word about the Second Amendment and join the fight to preserve our right to keep and bear arms. I mean, take that quote, for instance. I think we can all agree at this point who the founders believed comprised the militia. The militia is us. The leftists in Congress would refuse to allow the militia, meaning us, to be armed. They want us to lose everything. They want us to depend on them for our existence, because that's how they'll solidify the power that they so desperately want. How precarious, as Patrick Henry put it, would our existence as individuals or even as a country be if we depend on them for our safety and security? I mean, all we have to do is look to places like Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, Baltimore as examples of what that would look like. And then just extrapolate that on a national level. I mean, it's clear that their interests are demonstrably divorced from our happiness. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, I mean, we all know that the left's end goal is to completely restrict the citizens from having any firearms whatsoever. They want them concentrated in their hands and the people that are protecting them. But in Oklahoma, constitutional carry is now in effect. So if you are legally able to own a firearm in Oklahoma, you can carry that firearm. You don't have to petition the state for permission to exercise your constitutional rights to keep and bear arms, to protect yourself, to protect your family. Oklahoma is the 15th liberty-loving state to allow permitless carry. Vermont, shocking. Montana, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Wyoming, Kansas, West Virginia, Idaho, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, South Dakota all allow permitless carry. I'm just waiting for Texas to join that list. But on the liberty-loving side, we have those states that allow people to exercise their constitutional rights. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have states that are doing everything they possibly can to restrict that right and make it burdensome and onerous to exercise that right. Now, most states have laws that prohibit local jurisdictions from imposing gun control restrictions that are more severe than what the state's laws are. These are called preemption laws. Now, a number of states, including Washington State, are trying to challenge these laws, passing laws that are more restrictive. Missoula, Montana had a universal background check law it ended up being rejected by the state Supreme Court. And a judge in Edmonds, Washington, recently tossed out a gun storage law. So they're trying. They're trying to impose these restrictions. Thankfully, it's getting rejected by the courts for now. But they're getting creative because Seattle imposed a $25 tax on gun and ammunition sales. This took place, I believe, in 2017. And it was actually upheld by the state Supreme Court by saying that it was a tax meant to raise money for the public good rather than calling it a regulation. But guess what the net effect of that was? Well, the goal was to raise money to help reduce gun crime for research purposes and things of that nature. But the net effect since this tax went into effect was that gun violence has risen and gun sales have decreased. And so when gun sales decrease, the amount of revenue that you get from the taxes decreases. And as of now, they've raised like 20% of their projected of what they were projected to raise. It's been an abject failure. And not only that, every gun shop in Seattle except for one has moved outside of city limits, which is why they've raised so little revenue from this. Seattle is run by a bunch of anti-constitutional, anti-gun, left-wing nuts. They don't want lawful gun owners in Seattle. They don't want guns in Seattle, period. And they're making lawful gun owners go out of their way and pay to exercise their constitutional rights. Speaking of left-wing nuts, one of them just dropped out of the disarmament primary, and we'll talk about that after this quick break. Our good buddy, Robert Francis, has dropped out of the disarmament primary. Now, I was going to play taps coming out of the break in response to that, but something occurred to me that it just was disrespectful to the men and women of the military who have that song played at their funeral. So Robert Francis doesn't deserve that. But he's out of the race, and it's cause for celebration, but don't rejoice too much, because the rest of the field's beliefs, they're right in line with his. They were just upset at him for actually being honest enough to say it, to verbalize it. Because if any of them win, Biden, Warren, Buttigieg, who's moving up in the polls, if any of them win, there is a very real danger that policies for which Robert Francis and Eric Swalwell were openly advocating could go into effect. But anyway, that's one less tool we have to worry about. But another one that is still in the race and floundering a bit is Kamala Harris. Her campaign, like I said, she's flailing, trying to drum up interest in her campaign, but she's blaming racism for her performance. Imagine that.
Is America ready for a woman, and a woman of color, to be president of the United States?
America was ready for a black man to be president of the United States.
And this conversation happened for him. There is a lack of ability or a difficulty in imagining that someone who we have never seen can do a job that has been done, 45 times by someone who is not that person.
Erroneous! Erroneous! Erroneous on both counts.
She's actually saying, just after Barack Obama was elected twice, she's actually saying that the country is too racist to elect her and too sexist to elect her. It couldn't possibly be her stance on abortion or her flip-flopping on helping ICE deport illegal immigrants, or her hypocrisy and admitting to smoking pot, even though she once laughed at the notion of legalizing marijuana. Or when she gave an interview in which she advocated for eliminating private health insurance, and then less than 24 hours later, less than 12 hours later that morning, she backtracked and said she wanted to keep a market-based system. By making this type of statement, she's basically presenting us with a binary choice. Either we vote for her or we're racist. Or me as a black man, I'm a self-hating black man for not voting for her, which is something I was told when I didn't vote for Barack Obama. And actually, she's not even saying we're racist. She's saying that the Democrat Party, the party for which she's trying to get the nomination, are a bunch of racists. That doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me. There's a few other things I want to get to today, but before we move on, I just want to talk about another minority woman in the race. Well, 1/1024th of a minority anyway, Pocahontas. She released her plan for Medicare for All. It has a price tag of $52 trillion. Now, you know, when they release these numbers, this is the low end of the scale. So if she's saying it's going to cost $52 trillion, the likelihood is it's going to be more like $60 or $65 trillion. And where is this money going to come from? Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax proposal? I mean, that's, according to her own numbers, it's only going to raise $2.75 trillion over 10 years. So where's the other 50 to 60 trillion going to come from? Well, let's take a look at that for a second. The total annual corporate profits are $2.08 trillion. The combined net worth of the world's 2,153 billionaires is $8.7 trillion, whereas the total national debt right now is almost $23 trillion. The total value of the stock market is $32 trillion. The total value of every home in the United States is $33 trillion. But the total amount spent on healthcare in the United States between 1960 and 2017 was $59.6 trillion. The total amount of tax revenue raised in the country's history is $76.7 trillion. The total combined GDP for the entire world is $86.6 trillion. And the United States government has spent in its entire history $91.7 trillion. And she's proposing more than half of that, almost 2/3 of that, depending on which number you go with, 2/3 of the total amount spent in the history of this country in 10 years for Medicare for All. Who thinks that's realistic? Who is going to vote for that? I mean, even the low end of what she's proposing is double what our national debt is already. So where is this money going to come from? I'm not going to get into the economics of this right now and what a catastrophe it would be if something like this were to go into effect, and the effect that it could have on the entire globe if we were to do something like this. It's really just insane to even contemplate, but here we are. Now, I know this one is not actually in the disarmament primary, but there are polls that suggest that if she were to get in, she would be the front runner, and that is none other than Michelle Obama. And she made some news this week with some of her comments. Take a listen.
I can't make people not afraid of black people. I don't know what's going on. I can't explain what's happening in your head, but maybe if I show up every day as a human, a good human, doing wonderful things, loving my family, taking care of things that I care about, maybe, just maybe, that work will pick away at the scabs of your discrimination. And maybe that slowly won't unravel it, because we can't do it for them, because they're broken. Their brokenness and how they see us is a reflection of their brokenness. And you can't fix that. You know, I want to remind white folks that y'all were running from us, you know, because you were running from us, and you're still running because we're no different than the immigrant families that are moving in. And so, yeah, I feel a sense of injustice. You can see it all of a sudden, because we grew up with friends of all races when we first moved in, but yet, one by one, they packed their bags and they ran from us.
Wow, it takes some balls. It really does take some stones to say that as she's famously moving into a 28-acre mansion on Martha's Vineyard, one of the most exclusive communities in the country. Her husband was president. Her husband was the first black president in the history of the United States. It doesn't get any more privileged than that. I mean, what is she talking about? Are there racists in this country? Yes, of course. Is it institutional? Of course not. Of course not. I mean, more white people voted for Obama than voted for Clinton or Trump. All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and take another quick break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about some classic libsplaining that went on, and then get you out of here with some galactic stupidity. See you on the other side. So I've talked to you all about libsplaining before, and basically what it is, and you hear it all the time, when you hear something some leftist said that was ridiculously stupid, and then you'll have some pundit come on and try to explain what they really meant. Well, that happened again. This time it was on Tipping Point with Liz Wheeler. She had Jason Nichols, one of our favorites, on to explain something that Alexandria Occasional Cortex said.
It wasn't until I heard of a man by the name of Bernie Sanders that I began to question and assert and recognize my inherent value as a human being that deserves health care, housing, education, and a living wage.
So let me see if I have this straight. She did not understand her inherent self-worth until she heard of Bernie Sanders. Part of what she's saying here is that her parents did a crappy job raising her. I mean, what is that? Okay, so her parents did a piss poor job raising her, and she needs to look to some outside influences for guidance or helping her to form a sense of self-worth. And as a Hispanic woman, she's going to pick a geriatric white guy? I mean, I'm confused. But it's a really good thing that we have our friend Jason Nichols to explain it to me.
But I think what she's saying is that she learned that she should fight for those things for herself and for others, like healthcare, like education. Not saying she didn't see value in herself. She understood that, but she understood that and to run for office or be a grassroots activist in order to secure those rights for herself, for her others, and for future generations.
Yeah, that's not what she said. And if that is what she meant, then she should have said that. But, I mean, let's face it. You and I both know. She said exactly what she meant to say. And Jason Nichols' interpretation of it is what he wanted her to mean. What he wished she had said. I mean, Jason Nichols has said some dumb stuff over the years. And frankly, both of those clips were in the running for this week's episode of Galactically Stupid. But the honor for this week's edition of
The Adventures of the Galactically Stupid
falls to this guy.
You know, Ali, anyone who questions extreme weather and climate change is just delusional at this point. We have seen in the state of New York what everyone is seeing. We see these weather patterns that we never had before. We didn't have hurricanes. We didn't have superstorms. We didn't have tornadoes.
What the hell did you just say?
That was Fredo Cuomo's older brother, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. Did he really just say that we never had hurricanes or tornadoes before this phenomenon, quote unquote, of global warming or climate change? That might actually be the dumbest thing I've heard all year. And that's in a year of Alexandria Occasional Cortex spewing her ridiculousness. Wow. All right, y'all, that's our show. We actually plowed through everything I wanted to get to today, and we got done ahead of schedule this week. But I do want to thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, leave a review, share this episode with your friends. Let's get the message out there ahead of 2020. You can find us on Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, anywhere you get your podcast from. You can find us. If we're not there, let us know, and we'll do what we can to get set up on that platform. We're also on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Parlay. It's at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. You can also hit us up on the website, thelibertycast.net. You can go to the podcast page, find all of the podcasts there, going back almost to the beginning. With the podcast, you'll find links to a lot of the stories that I use in creating the content for the show. And some stories I put up there just because I think you might find them interesting or informative. But again, thank you all for listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.